Hey everyone! Today is the next in the mini-series of end of the year videos for 2020. Today's is all the books I read this year. I will not be including DNF books, so I enjoyed almost all of these books because if I don't enjoy a book, I usually give up on it. Just so you know, I like character-driven books, fantasy and YA mostly. I'll put some stats on the screen for the books I read this year. Let's begin. The book Thief. I read this on audiobook and really enjoyed it. Most people will know this is a historical fiction about a young German girl during World War II. I think the point of view was really unique and interesting, and I loved seeing all the different people and their perspectives. I'm not a huge fan of historical fiction, so I didn't love it as much as I know some people do, but I still think it was really good and recommended to historical fiction fans. The Saviours Champion. I think this was my first adult high fantasy and I really enjoyed the reading experience. I liked it, but I did have some problems with it, like the excessive swearing that was our swear words, not ones original to the world, and that pulled me out of the story, and the fact that I didn't really enjoy the romance. I know it was marketed as a fantasy romance, but I read it for the fantasy and those were my favorite parts. The trials and challenges were the best bit in my opinion. I flew through it and definitely recommend if you like high fantasy adult romance hybrids. City of Bones, City of Ashes and City of Glass. My first venture into Cassandra Clare and I loved it. I read her Shadowhunters books as trilogies, not publication order, so these three came first and I really enjoyed them. A really cool concept with unique world building, that is explored more in later books. I wish there wasn't that weird storyline with the romance because I don't really like that, especially for YA, but I did enjoy the romance once that bit was over. I think the characters are really well developed and that's usually my favorite parts of my stories. A great young adult fantasy. Wuthering Heights. I loved this. I read a slightly different version because I can't wrap my head around old-fashioned classics prose, but it wasn't too altered and made the experience so much more enjoyable. I think it was a fascinating and intricate tale and the characters were very unique and well developed. Wuthering Heights now sits alongside The Great Gatsby as probably my two favorite classics. The Infernal Devices. A historical setting for the Shadowhunter world, it was really interesting to see how they used to operate and the way their society was in this time and place. In terms of enjoyment, this series was great, but I did have a few problems with it. There were some annoying tropes, but there were also some great characters, which I think is Clare's strongest point in all her books I've read, and some interesting relationships. At times the ideas felt more like fan fiction than a published novel, but I still enjoyed it. City of Fallen Angels, City of Lost Souls and City of Heavenly Fire. I also really enjoyed the second half of the Mortal Instruments series, though not quite as much as the first. There were some really cool ideas and scenes and I think the characters continued to develop. I enjoyed that we went to new places and continued to expand the world building too. The Bad Beginning, The Reptile Room, The Wide Window, The Miserable Mill and The Austere Academy. I decided to finally pick up the series of Unfortunate Events books since I loved the film as a kid and always wanted to read them, but my library never seemed to have the first one when I was a kid for some reason. I really enjoyed these books and I think the prose is excellent for a children's series. A lot of the situations and settings are really cool and interesting and build up tension. I read half of the Ersatz Elevator, but by this point I was a little bored of the characters and wanted to move on. They are really fast read, so I may go back to them, but I don't feel like I need to. My Sister, the Serial Killer. I really enjoyed this book. The very short chapters meant it was a super fast read, but it kept me on the edge of my seat wondering what would happen. The characters were done really well, and as I read I hated and loved and got angry with them. I think the ending felt a little abrupt and some things could have been more fleshed out, but other than that I loved it and recommend to readers of the adult genre. Daisy Jones and the Six. I read this on audiobook because it is written in the form of interviews, almost like a script, and the audiobook had a full cast and had good reviews. I really enjoyed this book, and again I think the characters were a standout. The descriptions were really good and I especially loved Daisy's parts. I recommend reading on audiobook if you choose to pick this one up. Tales from the Shadowhunters Academy. Weirdly, this is one of my favorite Shadowhunter books. It is a series of novellas that take place after the events of the Mortal Instruments. Even the synopsis is a spoiler for the Mortal Instruments ending, so I won't explain, but you can Google it if you want. We follow Simon and a cast of mostly new characters that I grew to really love throughout this collection, especially George. I didn't actually like the Bane Chronicles and I never finished reading it, so I didn't have high hopes going into this one, but I ended up loving it and I'm really glad I picked it up. The Dark Artifices. There's been a lot of Clare on this list, so I won't talk for too long, but I really loved most of this series except the final battle, which had a really weird part to it that didn't make any sense and I hated. The characters were all amazing and all the different settings were so fun to explore. I laughed out loud and I cried at parts. I don't think this Shadowhunter trilogy gets enough credit. Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. Everyone gushes about this duology because it is so amazing. The diversity, world building and characters in particular stand out for me. I've heard a lot of people say it's a really slow start, but I didn't think that, and usually if a book has a slow start I just give up because I can be quite an impatient reader, which is testament to Bardugo's prose and character work. I 100% recommend this duology. Letters to the Lost. I don't read in first person very often, so it took me a while to get used to this one, but for a contemporary romance, which I almost never read, I thought this one was pretty good. I think the characters were a little stereotypical and melodramatic at times, but I did enjoy reading. If you like YA contemporary romance, I think you'd love this one. The Raven Cycle. This is a 4-book series following Blue and a small group of private school boys as they search West Virginia for a dead Welsh king. I really liked the characters and relationships in this book, and I think the prose read really well. Even though there are 4 books, I flew through the series and recommend for character readers or urban fantasy fans. Opal. A short story that follows the Raven Cycle. It is from Opal's perspective and details the summer at the barns. I can't say too much because it will spoil the Raven Cycle, but I thought this story was interesting, but a little weird. I really liked reading from Opal's perspective, but the events were sometimes odd or told in quite a melodramatic way. I'd recommend if you liked the Raven Cycle since it's only about 30 pages, but not my favorite. A List of Cages. This book was really good, but it was so upsetting that I didn't really enjoy it. The subject matter is very heavy, so definite content warning for abuse. The book follows 2 boys in high school and how they become friends again after not talking for many years. I think it was well written and the characters and emotion were well done, but it was probably a bit too much for me, and because of that I didn't particularly like it, even though I think it was effective and well written and I know other people could really like it. Bridge to Terabithia. I was surprised by how much I really enjoyed this children's classic. I thought because it's a little older and for kids the writing style wouldn't be for me, but I ended up loving it. Some of the descriptions in here were very accurate and made me think, and the child's perspective is done respectfully and feels realistic. It follows a very similar plot to the movie, but I think I slightly preferred the book. If you liked the film, definitely give this book a try. Far from the Tree. A contemporary about 3 teenagers who were given away by their mother and find each other again. The characters and situation were interesting and I particularly liked Grace's parts, but overall I found the book a little slow and boring, and although I did enjoy parts I didn't really like it too much. Daughter of Smoke and Bone. I hadn't been able to get into a fantasy for a few weeks before reading this, so I can give it credit for that, but overall this book wasn't amazing. I really enjoyed the characters and some aspects of the world building, but the plot didn't make so much sense and the use of insta-love was so extreme that I couldn't overlook it the way I usually can. I do recommend this book and I've heard the trilogy gets better from here, but the use of that trope did sort of ruin the book for me, which is rare. Since I made this video in November, I'll read more books before the end of the year, but if I wait too long I won't get these videos out in time, so I will just add the books I read in November and December in the description or in a pinned comment. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and comment your favorite book of the year. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see the TV shows and films videos coming out later this month, as well as all my other content. Bye.